Dear all, thank you for attending our webinar. Let's wait a little bit before everyone joins and we will start. I would like to start with some technical information. Today's webinar will be conducted in English, but a Chinese simultaneous interpretation is also available. In order to switch to Chinese translation, press the globe button at the bottom of your screen and select Chinese. If you would like to switch to English, press Original. There is a questions and answers box in your controls bar where you can type in your questions. Our speakers will answer them at the end if we have some time left, because you know that time is quite limited. So the topic of our today's webinar is clinical trials and drug registration in Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. And now let me introduce you to our distinguished experts who will deliver valuable insights that you can use. Please meet Irina Petrova, Head of the Clinical Operations at OCT, and Eugenia Redkova, Head of Medical Science Consulting and Excellence. And me, my name is Polina Nabieva. I'm the Business Development Manager at OCT, and I will be the moderator for today. Eugenia, the floor is yours.
I'm delighted to welcome you to our webinar. In my part, I will give a brief overview of the regulatory landscape for clinical trials and drug registration in Russia and the Eurasian Economic Union. At the beginning, I want to point out that all these processes, clinical trials and drug registration, are regulated by the documents of the Eurasian Economic Union, and I will use an abbreviation in EAEU during our presentation. So this union consists of 5 countries: Armenia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyz Republic, and the Russian Federation. And this union was established to provide the common policies for different economic sectors, including the pharmaceutical industry. So in 2014, all these countries signed the agreement on common principles and rules of circulation of medicine products within the EAEU, and this was the starting point of the formation of the single market of the drugs in this region. Next slide, please. So there was a transition period after that, and from 2021, this transition period finished, and all countries should now follow the regulations of the EAEU for clinical trials and drug registration processes. And currently we have more than 70 guidelines. They are devoted to different topics. They are rules for registration and expertise of medicine products for medical use. They are guidelines for clinical and preclinical studies, GLP, GMP, GCP, GVP. So quite a huge set of guidelines for the EAEU region. Also, the union has its own website where you can find the legal portal with all the guidance is published there. Unfortunately, just some of them are translated into English, but all of them are presented in local languages and are available and open. So the EAEU has its own drug database in which all drugs registered within the EAEU regulations are listed. The brief information about each drug is given, and the relative documents are also available. It is very important that all the requirements of the EAEU are highly harmonized with the requirements of the commonly acceptable guidances and regulations of the ICH, World Health Organization, FDA, EMA in context of the study design, biostatistics, study documents, and drug dossier. And despite the fact that so many processes are unified, there are still some country-level specific processes which are not harmonized between the EAEU countries. They are the process of the approval of clinical trial. And my colleague Irina will discuss more on this. And also each country of the EAEU has its own database of the approved clinical trials. Next slide, please. So if you are going to conduct the clinical trial in the EAEU or submit the clinical data within the registration dossier, you can just follow the commonly acceptable guidances, as we said, for clinical development program, for study design, biostatistics, clinical study protocol, informed consent form, CSR. So all the guidelines of ICH and especially EMA, because the EAEU regulations are highly harmonized with the requirements of the European Medicine Agency, can be used for the planning of the clinical trials and writing the documents. But there are some particularity. It is that at least one clinical study must be entirely or partly conducted in the EAEU country. In other words, local data are mandatory in the EAEU region. And there are two options: to conduct the standalone local clinical study, or to include the Russia or other country of the EU region into the international multi-center study. And what we see in the practice, and from our point of view, the second option is the best one. Inclusion of the EAEU country in the international multi-study is the money and time-saving strategy as compared to conducting the standalone local clinical trial. Also, we expect the third option in the future is GCP inspection. Probably no local data will be required and GCP inspection will be applicable, but this process is under discussion. There are draft documents, but there are no procedures implemented. So we just expect in some time this process could be also applied in the EAEU region. Next slide, please. So if it's obvious that EAEU country could not be included in the multi-center studies and the standalone local clinical study is required, so which study design could be considered? For chemical generics oral dosage forms, it will be local bioequivalence study. For vaccines, it could be local immunogenicity study. For biosimilar products, previously it was required to conduct the phase 3 efficacy study, but now we see the situation is changing. And for some products, local phase 1 PK study could also be applicable. And for original products, different scenarios could be considered, and this should be discussed, which local study should be conducted. What is important is that these studies, local studies, they should be comparative in the study design. The sample size for them should be statistically justified, and the study design, choose of comparator, blinding, study endpoints should be justified based on the ICH or EMA guidelines. So these are quite serious clinical studies, quite serious tracks. So this is a standalone clinical study. Next slide, please. But the good news is that not for all drugs local data are needed. And you can see on this slide the list of drugs for which foreign data could be applicable and no local data are required. So they are generic chemical drugs, which are aqueous solutions, eye drops, different also products based on this drug form. Also orphan drugs, and drugs that meet criteria of special registration pathways. So we have special programs, and if the product meets the criteria of the registration, the special registration pathways, so it could be registered based on the foreign data as well. Next slide, please. So this is a brief overview of the special programs. They are named as drug registration with the establishment of additional requirements, drug registration in exceptional cases, for example, for super orphan drugs, drugs for which efficacy and safety data are limited. This is the program of conditional drug registration for very innovative drugs. And for some products, expedited drug expertise could also be applied. So the timelines for the regulatory review becomes shorter as usual process. And also, specifically for Russia, we have one more, like a program document. This is the decree of the government of the Russian Federation about the drugs which are in shortage, or there is a risk of shortage of these medicinal products. And the drugs which are included in this list, they can be registered through the abbreviated clinical program, so to be very fast available to the market. And this list includes both chemical drugs, biological drugs like pembrolizumab, semaglutide. So this list is changing and includes different medicine products. Next slide, please. So when we visit China, we have a we see a great interest to the processes of herbal drugs, how to register herbal drugs in the EAEU. So the regulations say that clinical trials are not needed, but the product should meet their specific criteria. And frankly speaking, these criteria are quite difficult to meet, to be followed. So you can see it here on the slide that herbal drug should have the safety profile confirmed by the long-standing experience. It is at least 10 years from the first systematic and documented use of the herbal medicine product within at least 3 EAEU states, 3 EAEU countries. So at least 10 years of usage, and 3 countries of the EAEU region are required for the herbal drugs to be registered without any local data. Also, the drug should be over the counter, OTC, but I don't think that this is a great problem for the herbal drugs. So if these criteria are not met, the herbal drugs can be registered as a dietary supplement, or like usual medicine products with local data and with all the regulations for the ordinary medicine products used in these cases. We have special regulations for dietary supplements. Our company does not work with dietary supplements, but anyway, there are companies that provide such service, and the herbal drugs can be registered based on the specific EAEU regulation for the herbal medicine. Next slide, please. So this is just a brief overview of some registration aspects. As you can see, the registration dossier should be submitted in the commonly acceptable CTD format with the usual models with non-clinical and clinical data. Also, the sponsor should submit their summary of product characteristics and patient information leaflet. The structure and content of these documents is similar to the requirements of the European Medicine Agency. So, and after the registration, SMPC and patient information leaflet, they will be published in the EAEU database of the drugs and will be available online. Next slide, please. So, and at the end of my part of presentation, I just want to give some brief overview of the registration process. The sponsor should choose the reference country. So we use so-called centralized procedure when the sponsor chooses the reference country, registers the product in the reference country of the EAEU, and the registration process in other countries could be through the recognition procedures with more simplified processes and with shorter timelines. In our practice, we see that Russia, could you please, okay, thank you. So in our practice, we see that Russia is the country which is usually chosen for the registration as the reference country. That's why I just put Russia as an example here. So the processes are two parallel steps. They are GMP inspection and registration dossier. GMP inspection usually takes about 11 months, and it will be conducted by the Ministry of Industry and Trade of the Russian Federation. And the parallel process is the submission of the dossier to the Ministry of Health of the Russian Federation. After that, dossier undergoes the expertise, and expertise report is issued. And if the drug is registered, is approved for the usage. The registration in other countries could be through the recognition process when the sponsor does submit the Model 1, and the regulatory authorities of other EAEU countries, they just review the expertise report which was developed by the reference country. So you can see there are timelines. It will be about 11 months for the reference country and about 100 working days for the recognition processes in the EAEU countries. So this was just a brief overview of regulatory requirements for clinical trials and drug registration. Thank you.
Eugenia, thank you so much for your part of presentation. Was really insightful. We appreciate it. And before we move on, let me please get back to the technical slide with information regarding translation, because some attendees joined us recently. So I would like to highlight that if you want to switch the language, please use the globe button at the bottom of the screen and switch English language to Chinese. And if you want to change language to English, just select original sound. Well, so do not hesitate to ask questions. We will be glad to answer after the webinar or by email. Well, so now we are ready to proceed. And our next speaker is Irina Petrova. She's the head of clinical operations department at OCT. And now we are going to learn more about clinical trials conduct in Russia and EAEU region.
Thank you, Polina. I would like to start my part of the presentation with the brief description of clinical trials landscape in Russia and other state members of European Asian Union. First of all, I would like to say that Russia has always been an active participant of multinational clinical trials for several decades. A lot of global pharmaceutical companies, a lot of foreign Western biotechs and other companies preferred Russia as one of their members of one of the countries for their international clinical trials. Not only because Russia is a big country and Russian investigators and Russian sites are famous for good recruitment numbers, but also because of these local regulatory requirements to have local study data in the registration dossier. So the both purposes were met if Russia was included in the international, multinational clinical trials. Russian sites provided undoubtful quality data. This was confirmed by numerous inspections of the regulatory authorities of other countries, such as FDA, EMA inspections, China FDA inspections. That inspections came well, and none of the inspections results prevented the drug for getting marketing authorization in many countries. We reviewed the statistics, reviewed the clinical trial registries for the last year, 2023. As Eugenia said, there are open clinical trial registries available for a majority of the member states, with exception of Kyrgyzstan. So, and of course, Russia was the leading country, and I would say that this amount of clinical trials, somewhere between 700 and 800, is a steady amount over the several last years. So in 2023, 766 trials were approved in Russia. Much less amount was approved in other member states, 28 in Belarus, 17 in Kazakhstan, and 8 in Romania. And this is not only because of the size of the countries, they're not that big, the population is not that big, but also because Russia is the leading member state. So probably this explains that the majority of the companies prefer to do their clinical trials in Russia. Also, we retrieved statistics for the last 5 years, 2018, 2023, and tried to make an analytics what types of clinical trials were approved in Russia during these years. So, as you can see on the slide, approximately 1/3 of approved clinical trials were international multi-center clinical trials. Another third were presented by bioequivalence studies. That's not a secret that there are a lot of chemical generics registered in Russia every year, a very substantial amount. Local trials done by Russian pharmaceutical companies were only 17%. And what is interesting, the local clinical trial done by foreign sponsor were just 4%, as opposed to 33% when Russia was a part of multinational clinical trial. So it's obvious that foreign companies preferred the way of getting local clinical trial data from the strategy of inclusion Russia into the international clinical trials, MRCT, as far as I know, Chinese companies use this abbreviation. Frankly speaking, this is not like the most updated clinical trial landscape numbers, because in 2023 and 2024, the landscape changed significantly. We promise that on the next webinar, we will provide the updated statistics on the distribution of different types of clinical trials approved in Russia. But so far, I can say that we see that amount of bioequivalence studies increased dramatically. Also, Russian pharmaceutical companies became really active, and they do a lot of clinical trials now, much more than in the past. So we would expect that 17% will double or kind of. At the same time, the amount of international clinical trials is decreasing, but the sites and investigators are still very, very much motivated to be a part of international clinical trials. So this is really a good time to include Russia into your international clinical trials programs. Next slide, Polina. So now here you can see the process of clinical trials approval in every member state. I will start with Russia and then briefly comment on how much processes in other countries differs from Russia. Maybe it would be the easiest way. So the regulatory submission process in each country, as Evgeny already said, is different. So clinical trial regulations are country specific. So in Russia, the whole process takes 40 business days, and it starts with the application to the Ministry of Health. And the Ministry of Health is a body which actually administers the whole process. They don't do expertise, but actually they like run the whole process. They do preliminary expertise of the submitted documents, and they take 5 business days for that. What they check completeness, that all required documents are present and the quality of the documents is good. They also check investigators' credential, whether they can be qualified as principal investigator for the study. The requirements are not less than 3 years of experience in the clinical trial industry, not necessarily as principal investigator, but as a sub-investigator as well. And the therapeutic profile, the certification of principal investigator should comply with the indication. Like for oncology study, pediatrician can never be approved. Or for dermatology study, I don't know, oncologist can never be approved. So the principal investigator should be qualified for working with in this particular therapeutic area. So after the expertise by Ministry of Health is finished and there are no findings or comments, they direct the appropriate documents to the expertise. There are 2 types of expertise. One is ethics, and it's done by Council of Ethics, and another is scientific expertise done by Scientific Center of Evaluation of Medicines. Both of these bodies take 30 business days for the expertise. Whereas Council of Ethics is mostly focused on ethics aspects, so they review protocol, brochure, informed consent, all patient-facing materials, and they focus on the ethics aspects. At the same time, scientific expertise is focused on study design, sufficiency of preclinical and clinical data, selection of primary endpoints, subject population, they review statistical section of the protocol. So that type of expertise is done by them. In case there are no comments from both of these expert bodies, they direct the reports back to the Ministry of Health. And within 5 days, in case of no comments, Ministry of Health will issue a clinical trial approval document. If there are comments from any of these expert bodies, Ministry of Health will issue a deficiency letter. For reply to deficiency letter, the sponsor has a maximum of 90 business days, which it's like a significant amount of time. And in majority of the cases, if there is a deficiency letter, of course, the sponsor wants to submit the reply as early as possible. But nevertheless, so you have 90 days to address the comments. And then within another 30 business days, the expert body who issued comments or deficiency will provide the final conclusion whether they are satisfied with the reply or not. I should say that within our more than 20-year experience, the case when the study was rejected, the cases are really rare, this exceptional. In most cases, the deficiency letters are not rare. It happens. But in vast majority of the cases, we, together with the sponsor, managed to address the comments adequately and received clinical trial approval. This is not the end of the process in Russia, because to import the project, the investigational product, you need to get import permit. Actually, I will not spend a lot of time on that because the process is really easy. The package of the documents is minimal, and the process is totally electronic and takes a week. The official timeline is 10 business days, but normally import license is provided much faster. The same about exportation of the biosamples. So there is the same procedure. You need to get a permit and then you can export biosamples freely. It's an umbrella license. You don't need to get it every time you export samples or import IMP. It's given for the entire duration of the study. The similar process is in Armenia and the timelines is similar. The good thing about Armenian regulatory authorities is that they may communicate through email. So if they have minor questions, they will not wait like until the expertise is finished and then issue a deficiency letter. They will ask you minor questions by email and you can reply. And this is really helpful to avoid like minor deficiencies. Also, the same process is in Kazakhstan, but submission is parallel. So review is parallel. So first goes scientific expertise, then goes ethics expertise. And the official timelines is 70 business days. But in our experience, sometimes in Kazakhstan, delays happens. Never happens in Russia or Armenia, by the way. In Belarus, the process is a little bit different because there is no central ethics committee. They have local ethics committees, and after scientific expertise is over, it takes 45-60 business days. We do submission to local ethics committees, and it takes another 3 weeks. The process is consequent, and in Belarus, you may get regulatory approval within 4.5 months. In Russia, I forgot to mention, there are also local ethics committees, and they may review some of them may review the documents in parallel with the Ministry of Health, with a central submission, or after that. Polina, next slide, please. Here, the slide is quite busy. I try to present the information about necessary regulatory documents just in a table in a comparative way. Again, I will start with Russia. In general, the content of the package of the documents is really similar in all countries, just with a slight variation. So for Russia, what we need. So we need a delegation letter, first of all. This is the main legal document which authorizes CRO, your local agent, to submit and act on your behalf on the territory of Russian Federation. So in the power of attorney, we usually describe all activities which sponsor delegates to a CRO, starting with submissions and IMP importation, biosamples exportation, ending with interaction with the sites, like signing site agreements, monitoring, etc., doing local ethics submissions. The delegation letter for foreign companies, including Chinese companies, should be apostilled in the embassy and notarized. We get it in Chinese or English language, and when we receive the original, we do notarized translation. All documents submitted to Russian regulatory authorities should be translated into Russian. That's a requirement, including protocol, brochure, and any other information about IMP, for example. So when planning submission in Russia, you should consider this because it may affect the timelines. Even if you have the full package of the documents, you need to consider time for translation. Normally it's 2 or 3 weeks, and also delegation letter, apostille, takes time. Some companies may provide it within 2 weeks, some will require a month. Insurance should be local, and your CRO will do it for you, and it's not a lengthy process. Within 1 week, you may get the insurance. For insurance, they require only the protocol. Patient-facing materials, informed consent, subject diaries, so that's obvious, all in local language. Also, documents about IMP and manufacturing process. In Russia, you just need certificate of analysis, not necessarily for the batch which will be used in the study. For any valid batch is acceptable. And GMP certificate. GMP certificate is a tricky thing for Chinese companies. We know that. Some time ago, Chinese regulatory authorities canceled the procedure, and they no longer issue GMP certificates. We propose, instead of GMP certificate, and we had such prior experience, to provide the old one, which expired if you have any, and also provide the explanation why GMP certificate is not available with the reference to the relevant legislation. And results of your own audits or inspection of the manufacturing site with the conclusion that it's GMP compliant. That substitutes the GMP certificate and accepted by Russian regulatory authorities. Protocol and brochure, of course, and the translation into local language, investigator's credential, which is curriculum vitae. This is what your CRO will take care about it. Site list and documents. In Russia, it's just a list of the sites, and no other documents are needed. Starting from 2025, submission will be fully electronical. This submission will be, the electronic submission will reduce the time at the Ministry of Health. So now the official timeline says 40 business days. In 2025, it's going to be 31 business days, meaning 1.5 months. So quite fast. Also in 2025, there will be no new documents presented. It's TSE certificate and viral safety certificate for biologic products, and also for biologic products, manufacturing quality control and batch comparability data will be required, like a short part of IMPD. It's just for biologic products, not for chemical. So the packages in other countries like Belarus, Armenia, and Kazakhstan are pretty much similar, but all of these countries require IMPD, investigational product dossier. In Kazakhstan, only for phase 1 and 2 trials, not for phase 3, but still. So that complicates the package a bit, but not much. Also, in these 3 countries, IMP labels are required for submission. Also, the package for investigators is a little bit different because more documents are needed, like valid GCP certificates, medical license in some countries, sometimes protocol signature page, like in Belarus. For investigational sites, for medical institutions as well, there are more documents required in other countries than in Russia. For example, in Belarus, it's a specific document for institution consent agreement to do clinical trial. In Kazakhstan, this is information about site equipment and site SOPs. In Armenia, this is institutional license and contract template, not the executed contract, but just the template. And among other documents, I can mention EAEU number if the study is done in the European Union and EAEU is available, list of ongoing trials, clinical trial approval in other countries if done, the same in Armenia, and in Kazakhstan, the list of study materials, devices, whatever is provided to the site. And also these 3 countries required CRF. For submission, Russia not. In original language, of course, CRF is not translated into local language. And in the last line, you will see the approximate amount of state regulatory fee. In some countries, it varies and depends on the complexity of the trial, on the phase of the trial. So every time the fee may be different, but the average amount is here, so you can understand. That's basically all about regulatory submission process and approval. And next slide, Polina, please. And finishing my part of the presentation, I would like to summarize the most important points that have been discussed today. The key takeaways that we believe are really important for understanding the clinical trial and drug registration procedure in Russia. So first of all, clinical trials and drug registration in Russia must comply with the European Asian Union regulations. At the same time, European Asian Union requirements, especially requirements for study design, are largely harmonized with the guidelines of ICH, EMA, and FDA. So in case of the question whether the study designed in a certain way is acceptable for registration, you can actually take as a reference the relevant EMA guidance to see whether it's going to be acceptable or there are risks. As we mentioned several times so far, local clinical study data are needed to get the product marketed in European Asian Union. The data can be obtained either through local study or through inclusion of any European Asian Union member state into the international clinical trial, into MRCT. Clinical trial approval process so far is country specific in each European Asian Union country. Whereas the rest of the approaches to study design and drug registration is harmonized. Russia is the leader when you look at the number of clinical trials approved annually. And Russian sites provides high quality clinical trial data, which is proved by the multiple inspection of ICH regulatory authorities and China FDA. Our company also participated in several EMA inspection and in Chinese FDA inspection as well. And when you're thinking about the strategy, how to obtain this local clinical study data and comply with the regulatory requirement, you should evaluate both strategy and, in our opinion, the strategy when European Asian Union member state is a part of international clinical trial is much more cost efficient and time efficient strategy when you compare it to the conducting the local clinical trial. Moreover, in some cases, especially in case of innovative products, you may struggle with the absence of straightforward and clear regulatory guidelines what type of local clinical trials you should do. That's probably it from my side, and I will give a word back to Polina.
Irina, thank you so much for the provided information. I'm sure that our audience will find it quite useful. And let me please move on and tell you a little bit about our company, about OCT, so you will know what to expect from us. OCT has been on the market for 20 years now, and we are very well known in the region. So a lot of companies across the globe trust our quality and they trust our expertise. During that time, we have conducted over 360 clinical trials in 29 therapeutic areas. We have 140 people on staff across the countries which we cover, because we cover not only Russia and EAEU countries, we cover some countries in Eastern Europe and in Central Europe as well. And also it's important to mention that the majority of people in our clinical operations team have either medical degree or a degree in pharmacology or biologics, it's like our advantage, because our specialists are on the same page with the client, with the principal investigators, which is very important. A lot of times we get the questions regarding inspections, because like I already mentioned earlier, a lot of companies look into different regions, different locations. So it's very important for a lot of pharmaceutical companies to understand that we comply with EMA and FDA regulations. OCT has gone through 3 EMA inspections so far with no major findings. And also please keep in mind that OCT has gone through 1 Chinese national regulatory inspection, also with no major and even with no critical findings. So we have that experience. Please keep that in mind. We're always open for collaboration. And moving on, our experience, as I told you before, we cover 29 therapeutic areas, and The majority falls to oncology, but we also cover such therapeutic areas as cardiovascular, respiratory, and so on. These are the top enrolling therapeutic areas from our portfolio because of the situation in the market. And of course, lots of companies come to our region for later stages for phase 2 and phase 3 studies. That is why the majority of our experience is phase 2 and phase 3 trials. But actually, we can cover other phases as well. So over 20 years, we conducted 9 own trademark conferences, including 2 in China. It's Russia-China Pharmaceutical Cooperation Forum 2023 and 2024 in June in Shanghai. They were very close to CPHI and very successful. Of course, we invite all of you to join our event next year. And we invite Chinese and Russian pharmaceutical companies to find ways for collaboration. So please come and join us in June next year. We will be happy to see you there. And of course, we will send more information regarding this event over the email. And of course, we will send this presentation after the webinar over email. Well, so if we're talking about our experience with working with China-based pharmaceutical companies, I just wanted to show you that our case studies have been published on Fierce Biotech and other social media. So if you want to closer look to these case studies, I will send you a link over WeChat. We also have a video project. It's called Industry Voice, and we interview experts of highest levels from pharmaceutical companies, from biotechs, and here you can see very well-known Chinese pharmaceutical companies which we have interviewed in the past. So if you want to be on our next video, please send me your contact information and I will reach out to you. As I told you before, if you have any questions regarding the topic of the webinar or our services, do not hesitate reaching out using contact details you see on the screen. So here is my WeChat ID. You can add me there and we can communicate there. We will send you all the relevant information that you may need. So please feel free to reach out, or you can also email us over the email that you can see here on the screen. Well, I'm glad to inform you that our team is planning a business trip to China in September. So we are going to visit such cities as Shenzhen, Guangzhou, Shanghai, and we'll also be attending such events as CPHI in Shenzhen and China Bio in Shanghai. So if you would like to meet us there, please reach out to me. We will be glad to meet at your office or at the conference, anywhere. Just let us know. So like we've promised, we have some time left and we are ready to proceed to your questions, and I will ask my colleagues to help me with that. And our first question is about bridging studies. So are bridging studies acceptable in Russia?
I can answer this question. We don't have the guidelines for bridging studies for the EAEU. So also we don't have some like ways to register the product through the small clinical trials, let's say 100 patients, non-comparative trials. So the regulatory authorities do not approve such projects. So therefore, I can say that no, we do not have currently the bridging study, some simplified way for the local study. As we discussed, each local study should be justified. The study design, the sample size should be justified. The study should be comparative in nature. So this should be the complete standalone local study.
Eugenia, thank you. And the next question is how our attendees can get the shortage list.
So this shorted list is published in Russian language, so it is available, and I think Polina can send this list, but it will be in Russian language.
Of course, I will share. Well, the next question is how many patients should be recruited in Russia for multicenter clinical trial?
I can answer this question. So there is no definite amount of subjects specified in any guidelines or legislation in none of the countries, member states of European Asian Union. So theoretically, it can be any amount, 1, 2, but actually we recommend, and this is what regulatory experts actually like announce as sufficient. It's about 10% of the whole sample size. Like if you have a study of 400 subjects, then approximately 40. It can be like 30, 35, 40, 50. But again, because Russia is not only like good market for the drugs, it's a good market for clinical trials. So Russian investigators are very experienced. So at the moment, amount of clinical trials, especially international, is low. So the competition is low. So please consider Russia not only just to comply with the regulatory requirements, but in general, like to do as a good place to do clinical trials and obtain the data.
Irina, thank you. And the next question is, if a product is not licensed in China, but it will be registered to Russian agency, the clinical trial will be a full phase clinical, and in phase 3, efficacy is also required rather than immunogenicity. Is this right?
I can say that it depends on the product, whether it is a biosimilar or original product. So the common concept is that the regulatory authorities review which data are already available, and the sponsor justify which data are already available. And based on this, the local study is planned. So this is just in general, but for original products, for innovative products, the way could be different depending on the population, study design, and so on.
Thank you, Eugenia. The next question is about the cost. So how much will it cost in average for each patient in a typical clinical study in Russia? For example, a cancer trial.
That's very difficult to say, actually, because trials are different, and a lot depends on the amount of procedures, amount of visits, duration of recruitment, duration of subject participation. It's very individual, so it's very difficult to say even a rough amount. But I can say that comparative to Europe, it can be maybe 30% cheaper than an average, the average grant or the cost of for the subject in any European country, Eastern European, for example, and even less if you compare with the United States or Western European countries.
Thank you. And the next question is, are the blood samples required to be approved by regulatory agency when exporting from Russia?
Yes, as I mentioned, there is a quite straightforward and easy procedure of getting, we call it expert license, or you may call it expert permit. So you provide the description of what you're going to exporting, also what type of the samples, blood, tumor blocks, or whatever, amount of the samples, appearance of the tubes, what the tubes will, like the volume of them, and then you will get an umbrella expert permit valid for the entire clinical trial duration. And at the customs authorities will be checking how many samples have already been exported, how many remains, etc. It is also possible to extend the license to both in the quantity of samples if like something has changed in the study, and the timelines.
Thank you. And the next question is, do Russia regulatory accept first in healthy a trial from a foreign sponsor?
If you submit the first in human studies foreign sponsor within the registration dossier, it is acceptable. But if we speak about conducting the clinical trial, first in human trial, there is a law in Russia that first in human trials in healthy volunteers could not be conducted for the products manufactured abroad in other countries. So this is the answer.
But in patients, you can do the trial. If you have like phase 1 cancer trial, then it's totally acceptable.
Thank you. And does a product already approved in the FDA need to be reclinicized in Russia?
Yes, unfortunately, local data are needed.
Okay, thank you so much, dear colleagues. I was told that we're run out of time, so unfortunately we will need to just to close our webinar for now. And I see that we have skipped several questions, and dear attendees, we will get back to you by email. We will answer all the questions that we can see here. And thank you so much for visiting our webinar. We highly appreciate it. And of course, I will get back to all of you. I will send you all the information. Have a nice day. It was a pleasure to see all of you here. We hope that our webinar was quite useful for you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.